The opening ceremonies of the Summer Olympics were Friday night. For most Americans, it was the first time in 4 years they thought about any country outside the U.S., at least those with whom we're not engaged in some sort of armed conflict. For that reason, the ceremony was as educational as it was entertaining. Thanks to Professors Bob Costas and Matt Lauer of NBC, I feel so much better informed about the world. So, what did we learn? I said it on Twitter, I was like, let the cultural arrogance begin. They're like, what are you talking about? Just watch. I think we had gotten to G. I think we had gotten to Ghana when the factoid was, if Ghana still went by its old name of Gold Coast, it would be in the same place in the lineup. God! Oh. Like, Ghana is the first African country to win its independence. The first one. We out here talking about the old name. Number one, after the United States, the British have the most troops in Afghanistan. Because, since 1980, we haven't been allowed to discuss Afghanistan in the Olympics unless it's in the context of occupation. All these countries in the opening ceremonies, there's somebody in the U.S. who tuned in to watch their country in the Parade of Nations. Never fails. And if you tune in for Afghanistan, every year since 1980, somebody's in y'all shit. Either it's the Russians, or it's us, or it's the Taliban, or something else. I have no idea what they compete in Afghanistan. You know what sports they play in Afghanistan? You would think the opening ceremonies would be, well, did you know? Nope. Only sport they play in Afghanistan is getting invaded. Number two, the greatest sporting performance in the history of North Korean sports was the late Kim Jong-il's 11 holes in one from his first ever round of golf. Kim Jong-un is going to realize he'll never live up to that, which means North Korea's athletes will never live up to that, which means it's time to assume what will happen to them if they don't come home with 50 gold medals. Opening ceremonies, we are so happy to be here in the Olympics. What Bob Costas want to talk about? Can we let people shine at the Olympics? I thought the whole point was you get out there, you walk around the track, we let y'all shine. We can't let nobody shine. Number three, the island nation of Madagascar is featured in a series of Disney movies of the same name. Trust me, on the world's largest stage, the last thing an African country wants is to be thought of as they were represented by a Disney movie. Number four, Angola was severely beaten by the Dream Team in 1992. Anybody could have played that first game against Mashed Out. You think about this in the preliminary rounds for the Dream Team. You know they played Angola, right? Who else do you know that they played in the preliminary round? Poor Angola took that first ass whooping for everybody. That's all anybody remembers. That's it. All Bob Costas left out was supplementary commentary from Angolan expert Charles Barkley. So now anytime Angola does something, that's all they're gonna talk about. They'll never want to bring up Charles Barkley saying he didn't know if that man had no spear. Right? Now I want to talk about Charles Barkley saying he didn't know if that man had eaten in a week. Number five, Winston Churchill called Uganda the Pearl of Africa. But he also never met Idi Amin. Gonna go on a limb here and say he also never saw the last king of Scotland either. I was in the kitchen, right? I was in the kitchen, I heard. Churchill called, I didn't hear what country he's talking about. Churchill called the Pearl of Africa. I was like, oh, I wonder what country that is. But he never met Idi Amin. Shit, man, it's the Olympics! Like, Idi Amin ain't been in charge for 30 years. In fact, they got a new president, not even new, because he's been there for 30 years too. You can talk about the dude after Idi Amin. He ain't been so great neither. Honorable mention went to the cliff notes on Kazakhstan, which you may not have known was the homeland of the great documentarian Borat. And Cameroon, whose women's soccer team prepared in Scotland and was thrown a going away party by their host, who dressed in kilts because they're from Scotland, which doesn't actually have anything to do with Cameroon. That's exactly what it would be like, is if the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade came up and they were like, oh, and up next we have a float from Morgan Stanley. Man, they've been bleeding money for the last so forth and so on. I mean, it's the Olympics. We can find something nice to say about everybody. There was one point where they're like, oh, it's such and such, another African country. Well, shit, that's it? Another African country? I know there's a lot of them, but damn. With all this learning at the Olympics, no wonder we don't need to learn geography anywhere else. I will tell you this though, you know what African countries they tend to be a little bit nicer about? The ones that had white girls carrying the flag, like they got to Zimbabwe. Now, if you want to talk about some bad things, you could do it with Zimbabwe. I was like, oh man, here we go. We about to talk about Mugabe. I was sure they were just gonna run down, everything that Mugabe had done, right? Nope. Had this cute ass white girl carrying the flag. All of a sudden, I forget what event she does, but that was what we were talking about. That's what these Africans need. A few more of the colonials still hanging around. They don't want nobody talk about y'all. Like South Africa comes. Ain't nobody talking about apartheid. Like, I'm sorry. I don't care what you say. I ain't the only person like this. When I see South Africa, I think of two things. Nelson Mandela and apartheid. They don't never talk about apartheid and that shit, but they talk about Idi Amin.